everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Um, we're going to be reading from Queer Sci-Fi's new anthology, Rise, which is actually pending. It is coming out on October 25th, and I'm going to put the link in the chat where you can find more about it. Hi, Kim. Um, so yeah, so the three of us are going to be reading, and we also have a reading from Alex Silver, who unfortunately could not be with us here today, but who sent me a video. So I thought instead of the three of us having to figure out which of us is going to have to go first, we'll play Alex's video first, and then the three of us can go. Um, and yeah, so each of us will like introduce our work, read. The stories are actually very short. It is a flash fiction anthology, so the stories are 300 words long, or no more than 300 words long. Um, and yeah, and then if there are any questions, we'll take those questions. And if not, we might do a few little, rapid fire readings at the end from other work that we have. So yeah, so why don't we start with Alex's video? Okay.
Hey, I'm Alex Silver, and I write queer happy ever afters, everything from nerdy contemporary romance to paranormal to a little bit of horror. And my new book that's coming out soon is Dan's Fantastic Haunts, Joliet Investigates Joliet Asylum. That'll be out on October 10th, so should be perfect ghost read for the Halloween season while you're waiting for the Rise anthology to come out at the end of the month. And the Rise anthology, my book is, or my short story is Minion. And when I saw the theme, I knew I was going to do something with necromancy. So hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed writing it. Arise, my undead minion! I gesticulate toward the roadkill raccoon I've dubbed Mitzi. The potion and a trickle of my magic will soon reanimate it. Emma rolls their eyes, but they can't hide their smile. They expect my theatrics by now. We've only been together since we both still went by our dead names, so practically forever. Needs more yeast. I swirl the concoction's dregs. Mitzi shows zero signs of life. Are you sure this is right? Emma hands me a spoonful, despite their skepticism. Auntie wouldn't lead us astray. I dashed the yeast into the bubbling vial next to the body. This recipe couldn't be more simple. I don't think it's supposed to smell like that, Jazz. Emma's nose wrinkles. Sour bread? The goopy mess resembles my failed attempt at a sourdough starter, Bob. My necromancy sucked the life out of my pet yeast. In hindsight, Bob never stood a chance as anything other than a convenient death magic battery. Odd, I followed the revival recipe, see? I nudge Auntie's grimoire toward them. Revival? Emma reaches for the thick book of handwritten spells. They scan the page, flip backward, and chuckle ruefully. No, Jazz, no, my love. Not revival. That's her sourdough troubleshooting tips. We want revivification. Emma turns several pages, then hands the tome back, open to the correct spell. They kiss my temple and take the sting out of their laughter. Oops, Emma's right. We're reviving Mitzi, not making a delicious loaf of bread. Guess we'll have to start over. Emma swaps out the gloop for a clean bowl, stealing another kiss in passing. No problem. One adorable undead minion coming up. I grin, rubbing my palms together with glee. It'll be nice to have an extra set of hands around the shop.
That was great. I enjoyed hearing something so very different from mine too, which I think just says something, a lot of things about this sort of anthology with such a, broad sort of theme to it. Such a simple sort of thing. Kristen, would you like to go first? Next?
Sure. I'll go in more or less order. I know I was thinking about that, the ways that we have stories that are in some ways similar, but so very, very different as we all take the Rise theme and go off in different directions. That's so much fun. So, I'm KL Noone. I publish with JMS Books mostly these days, aside from other things like being in the queer sci-fi anthologies and so on. mostly romance, fantasy, paranormal, some others. Sometimes they're superheroes or science fiction. Um, in the day job, I'm an English professor and teach a lot of Shakespeare and superhero comics, and sometimes stories about werewolves. And this particular story is also, well, it's a sneaky Robin Hood story in a lot of ways, but I also wanted a very bad pun. But I also figured there'd be a lot of people doing puns on bread and rising, which is why I'm also amused that Alex's story brought in yeast and sourdough. It's a good transition, but some other meanings of rise as well. And this one's called Time to Rise. How much longer? Marin, preoccupied, did not answer. Caraway seeds, assertion, molasses, slow heavy strength, and the sweetness of success. The rye itself, ancient life of the earth. The bread possibilities gathered under his hands. His table was flour dusted, familiar, cozy as the illusion of safety. The king's men, laughing, vulture sharp, had visited the village earlier. They'd taken what they wanted, food, the last copper, villagers as workers for the king's mines. They'd left blood and trampled fields. Again. We can't take much more. Rob, face a storm cloud, paced the kitchen, ran restless fingers through his hair, planted both hands on the table, but carefully, not disturbing the work. He was a spear of anger, the intensity that had drawn the small, scattered resistance into a real rebellion, following those blacksmith's shoulders. Rob had held the world's attention with stories, laughter, flirtation, in more peaceful times. Marin, tall and shy, having gone out to deliver a loaf of berry wheat healing, had drifted into the orbit of those stories on one rainy tavern night, and their eyes had met. These days, Rob held attention with other stories, with a burning voice. If this doesn't work, if we have to fight, it'll work. He hadn't done this particular spell before. Only small magics, kind magics, kitchen witchery, blessings, protections. He wasn't the magician his teacher had been, but he knew he could do this. He felt the power in the room, in their desperation, in his own conviction, in his love. He shaped malleable dough, a future, into a symbol, a crown, broken, a king's heart, stopping, a reprieve for their land. I'm sorry. Determination, sorrow, love were written on Rob's face, that we asked you to do this. It needs doing. Marin found a simple cloth to cover his working, and let his hand brush Rob's for reassurance. I'll finish the baking soon. The loaves just need time to rise. Told you we were going to end on a bad pun, but also some ominous curses and rebellions in progress. And of course, their names are a queer version of a Robin and Marian story. And that's my story for the flash fiction anthology, which I was very proud of being exactly 300 words.
That's great. Yes, it is always that I always treat it as a bit of a challenge to get it right on the as close as possible. Kim, do you want to go now?
Sure. I have no voice apparently this morning, but sure. I was tromping through a cemetery last night in the rain.
You're gonna have to tell that story too.
Yeah. So my name's Kim Fielding. I write a little bit of everything. I write horror, romance, science fiction, fantasy. And let's see, my most recent novel was Crow's Fate, which came out this summer, and it's one I was really excited about. And I have a short story coming out tomorrow, actually, because it's October, and it's called Bite Me, an elucidation in 3 acts, and it's a very fluffy werewolf story. So that's out tomorrow. And the story I wrote for the anthology is it's actually a variation on Alex's theme, but I think it's one of the fun things I think about these is people can take similar sort of plot elements and do really different things with them. So I think that's really fun. So my story is called Principle and Reality. It wasn't the principles that Matt Harden objected to. The principles were fine. Limited planetary resources, circle of life, the wrongness of playing God. But, he thought, as he spread the herbs on the basement floor in the prescribed way, the principles were bullshit when you were faced with reality. When the only man who'd ever held your heart was stolen from you by a moment's distraction behind the wheel. When you never had a chance to even say goodbye. When your body in bed was as cold and alone as a corpse in a coffin. When the night mist was clammy on your neck and the grave dirt heavy on your shovel. Once that reality slammed you in the face, you abandoned principle and searched the dark, dusty corners of bookshops that smelled of mice and old grease. You learned languages that nobody had spoken in 3,000 years. You turned away from friends and family and work, and you made promises to blurry figures lurking in shadows, eyes glowing like absinthe, voices like the whispers of 1,000 moths' wings. And then you did what Matt Harden was doing now. You lit the candles and watched as tiny wisps of smoke snaked upward. You made sure that the skeleton you'd so carefully prepared was arranged just so. You chanted words that made your tongue burn and your skin turn to ice. You waited, heart pounding. And when you saw the flesh reappear, the flesh that you'd once so tenderly caressed, that you'd known and cared for better than your own, and you saw the eyelids flutter open to reveal the blue pools you'd once swum in so freely, then you knew that principle is meaningless. You rejoiced, and you called out your lover's name, followed by, "Rise."
Oh, that's great.
A little bit more morbid necromancy there, I guess. Although I guess by definition, all necromancy is morbid. I don't know.
I guess. I was willing to just go along with the more or not morbid. No. Okay, so I'll go now. So my story is very different. So my name's Monique Cuillerier, pronouns she, her. I write mostly short science fiction. So my story for Rise takes a very different angle, and yeah, so it's a science fiction piece. And yeah, so I write mostly short fiction. I had a story out earlier this year that maybe we'll have time for reading in Bicycles and Broomsticks. And yeah, so why don't I just go ahead with this? Okay. From nothing. The goat died as Prox G rose above the horizon, the gas giant painting the sky in a kaleidoscope of colors. Eleanor found her daughter Kari in the barn, sitting in the straw, the goat's head in her lap. Kari smoothed the goat's hair away from her face. Boo Boo, she named her when the kid emerged from the extrauterine system. Eleanor paused in the doorway. 41 days since she and Sandra had moved their family to this lunar farm. They had brought all they needed to build this new life: seeds and soil to grow crops, eggs and sperm for animals, a 3D printing array for everything else. They had done everything they could. Eleanor knew that, but it still hurt to see the small goat in Kari's lap, to see the sadness settled in her child's face. Back on the ship that had been their whole lives until now, Eleanor and Sandra were primary agricultural workers. They knew about life and death, growth and decay. But this wasn't a generation ship. They were no longer surrounded by tens of thousands of others. There was only Eleanor and Sandra, Kari and Seth. Kari looked up. What should I do? We'll put her in the shed for now, away from the others. Eleanor wasn't sure the other goats would care, but she couldn't leave the body here. There was an incinerator, but she would deal with that later. Eleanor leaned down, taking the small body from Kari. Then they walked into the dazzling light and across the farmyard. This was what she and Sandra anyway, had chosen. Not easy, but it would be worth it. She looked about her, at the structures already built, at her child at her side. all this arising from nothing. That's mine. So, do we have any questions from the audience or for each other?
Oh, this is so fun. I'm actually thinking about Kim's there and that use of second person. How did you decide whether, like, how do you approach that and why it felt like it needed to be second person, or did it just feel like it needed to be that way?
Zoom up to date.
That's a great question because I never write in second person.
I
It's
think I
weird,
just
right?
kept
But
reading though.
it just kind of it did feel really natural. And I kind of felt like this was the main character talking to himself, kind of justifying to himself why why he was doing something
Ask
that
if
was
she did reading already.
initially against his principles. Yeah.
Yeah, so I sort of have a related question there. So how do you approach writing to a submission call? Like, do you like write specific, like, you know, if you see something like this, like, I don't know, like, I think with both of you, like, I've had stories in previous anthologies from queer sci-fi, and I sort of look forward to it. And I like this sort of very broad sense of like just having a word like that as a theme. And so, so like, do you, like, when you see that, like, do you write for that, or do you like look at something you already have that might fit, or what do you do?
Look forward to the theme and then panic about the word count. Uh, well, I think every single year that I've been in the queer sci-fi anthologies, the first thing that I've started was obviously going to be way too long, and so I had to restart. This one wasn't as bad as, oh, which one was it? Ink, which I think I had 3 different versions of. But I feel like at this point, I'm just going to assume that the first idea that I have and the first story that I start is going to be something way too long. With this one, my first idea got up to around 700 words, and I stopped and went, yeah, there's no way this is going to be 300 words. um, so that part's always a little bit stressful, but I love the simple kind of one word prompt of it because you can go in so many directions. You know, with Rise, obviously the very, you know, the necromancy as we were hearing, but the metaphoric, you know, revolutions, but also bringing things back. We have things that are doing takeoff and liftoff with spaceships. We have all kinds of things, and that's so much fun. I feel like I usually write more fantasy things, so I usually sit down and think about magic systems a lot. But the one word themes are always exciting.
For me, I think of it like it's almost like a puzzle, you know, like a sort of a game. And it starts as sort of like a word association. So let's, you know, what's the first thing that sort of pops into my head? And I did one of them a few years back was impact. And the first thing that popped into my head was a terrible pun. So my story was imp act, an act with imps in it, you know. So it's whatever kind of wherever my head goes. But I direct them spit, and they're so much fun. I mean, it's like this. It's like I said, it's like a game, and I usually end up writing like 2 or 3, and then I have to decide which one to submit. So that's fun because it's, you know, they're short. It doesn't take all that long, and they're fun to do kind of in between longer projects, and they're more challenging. I mean, it's a lot more challenging to write 300 words than it is to write 30,000 words in a way.
I write long all the time, like consistently. So the 300 words is a challenge. But it is fun. Like, yeah, every word has to do something, every word has to mean something. So it's actually a really good writing exercise, stripping things down.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the same thing. I mean, I do write a lot of short fiction, but I don't write this short usually. You know, short is usually like 3,000 or 5,000 words, and it is that trying to yeah, fit that story. Because so I often have the same thing where I start writing. My experience with these the queer sci-fi stories has been that I start writing a few, and yeah, and most of them aren't going to work, you know. because there's too much, and then it's that getting it down. And I find that it works for me anyway to sort of think of some sort of action happening, like a very like specific time limited sort of thing, and to keep it within that three. I mean, my first draft is always much longer than 300 words, and then it's getting those sentences more, like trying to keep the core of the story, and whittling down the sentences to still be legible, but at the same time shorter. So
what can I hyphenate? What can I abbreviate?
Yeah. I know my story that was in ink was like basically an alien abduction story, and that went through a lot of iterations to like I knew what I wanted, but it was difficult to sort of fit all of it within yeah.
The upside is things that would be sort of obnoxious in a full-length story can have a lot of impact in a really short story. It's like writing in second person, So
yeah, no, I think that's really true, because there are story ideas that are like that only have really like 300 words to them, right? Like they're, as you say, they would be obnoxious, or it would just feel like monotonous to go on for too long. But for a little story, it's I like that idea, telling the story using SMS messages. I think the interesting structures is one way of getting, where it would be that sort of thing, I think can be very obnoxious if it goes on for too long. It's like the structure might be cutesy or whatever, but how much of that do you really want to include? And there was Alvacat there had another question about that. Can you fit an interesting magic system into 300 words? I don't do magic systems, but what do you guys think?
Sort of,
I think you can just I think you can just drop in some pieces, and it gives enough of a sense of what that system is. I mean, you don't have to. I mean, it's magic. You don't have to give all the details anyway. So those, and they can be sensory details. I think in my story I mentioned something about the smell of these kind of creepy bookshops, and that those kind of little pieces I think can give you at least a sense of enough sense for a 300-word story.
It's only as much as you need to tell that particular scene, that particular moment. With mine for this one, all you really need to know is that he does magic through baking and it's kitchen witchery, and he hasn't done this particular thing before, but he's pretty confident about it. There's probably a whole other big magical system behind that, like how did he learn to do this? What do the specific herbs do? But we don't need to know that for this story. We need to know what this particular spell is and what it's going to do. So hopefully it's interesting. And I did, like Kim was saying, the tactile details, kneading bread dough, the scent of the different herbs that he's using, the things that are significant in that scene and in that moment, I think helps make it ideally an interesting magic system. There's the whole weight of implication behind that, right? One of the little sidelines in mine was, he wasn't as good at magic as his teacher was. So clearly there's a system behind that with he had a teacher, there was an apprenticeship. So it exists. But for right here, for this, the point is what he's currently doing. Yeah. Implication.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably broadly the biggest thing when writing flash pieces, is that you need to imply, everything you put into it needs to do sort of double or triple duty as far as, creating scene and, implying backstory and all of those sorts of things to make the most of it. We have about 20 minutes, so if we do want to do other readings, I think we have time for it. Yeah. So do you guys want to? I have something, but I'll let somebody else go first. Kim, do you want to go first?
Sure. I'm going to read the other one I wrote for this particular, because it's the sad thing, you write a few for a thing and you can only submit one, and then the other one's sitting there. So
Well,
this
you
is,
do. I write 1,000-word ones and then have to,
well, then you can use it for something else. That's okay. But I don't know what I'm going to do with 300 words other than, I guess, put it in a newsletter or something. So this is the other one I wrote. So and this one is actually the same kind of theme the rest of you have been having, but it's called Three Moons. 3 moons chased across the sky, and Nora, leaning against the exterior of the polymer wall of her house, wrapped her arms around herself and watched. Sometimes the moons enchanted her, but tonight they only felt alien. Which was funny, because in this place she was the alien. That was a sad laugh. Startled, Nora turned around to see Avery coming out of the house with a blanket slung over one arm. Nora reached for the blanket to wrap around her shoulders, but Avery did it for her. The climate in this place was always within comfortable human parameters, but tonight Nora was cold anyway. Can a laugh be sad? She asked. Avery took Nora into their arms, and that felt even warmer than the blanket. A laugh can be a lot of things, said Avery. It's an adaptable sound, flexible. Are you going to lecture me about how I'm supposed to be adaptable and flexible too? The brochures had emphasized that a lot. Endless possibilities, adventure, priceless opportunities for new beginnings. All true. But God, the plants were all familiar and the animals strange. The maps held no familiar contours, and there were 3 moons instead of just one. It's late, said Avery, kissing Nora's temple, and that simple touch of lips to skin felt exactly as it always had. Come inside? Nora let herself be led through the arched doorway into the space that served as kitchen and living room and bedroom. Cozy, she thought on her better days. Tonight it just seemed small. But it smelled like fresh bread. Loaf's almost out of the oven, Avery announced. They'd been experimenting with local microorganisms that acted like yeast. Did it rise properly this time? Avery smiled. We'll see in a sec. Nora hoped it had. So more with the bread.
So we're making bread puns in the chat.
I bake a lot. I bake all my own bread, so that seemed kind of natural to me. As when I think about rice, that's what I think about. That or necromancy, one or the other.
Bread necromancy.
Yeah.
Same. Oh, Kristen, do you want to go now?
Oh, sure. Let's see how much of this we can fit in a couple minutes. I figured since we also have Kels here, and this actually came up yesterday on the panel, I would do the beginning of our joint book, or rather the first of our joint trilogy that we're hopefully finishing next year, or that's kind of the plan, which is not about bread or necromancy, but is about Regency era magicians, sort of set right after the end of the Napoleonic Wars, very much right after, as in soldiers still coming home, and the Royal College of Wizardry and a secret, and all kinds of things, which has been really fun, by the way. We like writing together. So I figured I would do that. And this one's book 1. It's called Spells and Sensibility. Very Patricia C. Reed inspired, if you've read Sorcery and Cecilia. Book 2, which you can kind of see, is actually over there. It's called Chaos and Conjurations. And book 3 will be out again, ideally sometime next year. So this is the beginning. Why not start with the beginning? From chapter 1. Theodore Burnett did not like surprises. Theo did like order and tidiness, which made him an excellent head librarian for the Royal College of Wizardry. Certain requests might be unusual or challenging. Theo never had worked out just how young Mr. Gracely had managed to turn that copy of the Stones and Ley Lines of England into actual stone itself, though he had patiently undone the spell and rescued the poor book. But in general, his days were predictable, regulated, as neatly catalogued as his shelves. Everything in place. Magicians politely placing requests for rare volumes using the forms Theo provided. Researchers, students, readers, all tucked away quietly at their own individual desks. Everything in order. If anything wasn't, Theo would fix it. promptly. He preferred life that way, less messy, more comfortable. Particularly now, the college a bulwark against the outside world, the ebbing wake of war, Napoleon's ambitions, the loss of so many of England's bright young magicians. Theo's library was a refuge, familiar, structured, everything as expected. All of which was why, gazing at the scruffy, long-legged man presently asleep in the overstuffed chair in the second-story reading room, Theo's first and second and third emotions involved annoyance, rapidly followed by irritation, followed by disapproval. The man shouldn't even be present. The library was closing for the evening. Scholars and students dispersed to nighttime studies or revelry. The man also did not look as if he belonged at the college. His boots were good quality, but extraordinarily muddy. He was unshaven, his cravat did not bear speaking of, and his hair stood up the way hedgehogs might, if that hedgehog possessed soft-looking auburn spikes and an open-mouthed snore. He did have lovely cheekbones, though his face appeared rather too thin, as indeed did the rest of him. Theo, being short and inclined toward softness, a fact which he battled with lengthy walks and strict self-denial regarding buttered crumpets, had always appreciated tall and elegant men, delicious like the crumpets, splendid for the occasional indulgence. This particular man, however, was an entire country's worth of far from elegant. With the looseness of his coat, the unshaven face, he might have wandered in from a pub or off a sailing ship or out of any number of other disreputable places, and apparently he'd been exhausted enough to fall asleep partway through. They had to check the title, visible on the man's lap, Johnson's Complete History of English Magic, Volume 1 of 20. Well, Johnson's dryness was boring enough to send anyone off for a nap, Theo considered. He regarded the man. He contemplated options. He really had meant to walk through the library and then return to his own rooms, a small but functional tower on the college grounds. He planned to toast some cheese for supper, to read a recent historical novel, and to go to bed at a sensible hour. He had not anticipated a gentleman, if that was the word, asleep in his library chair. The reading room was not a place for making one's bed. Theo said as much out loud. The man did not stir. So Theo sighed, went over, and put out a hand to shake him into wakefulness. Up close, the man was even thinner, not precisely healthy, as if worn to the bone, and a stain marred the sleeve of his jacket with, was that blood? Theo stared very hard at it. Dried, at least, which was better than not. He touched the man's shoulder, exceedingly gently, and the room erupted in blinding white light. And that's a good pause point with a cliffhanger.
Excellent. That was fabulous. Thank you so much. Okay, well, I'll read too. So I'm gonna read from a story. It's called Touching Mars. It's in this anthology from Microcosm Publishing called Bicycles and Broomsticks, Fantastic Feminist Stories About Witches on Bikes, that came out this past January. Yeah. Touching Mars. The sun is creeping above the horizon. Its first feeble rays pierce the shadows in my bedroom. I am awake and dressed, standing in the circle I cast. A deep breath fills my lungs. I close my eyes and let the anxieties of the day empty from my mind. Facing east, I focus on the element air. Air is the breath moving in and out of my lungs, air representing my mind. As my focus wavers, I turn to the south and allow myself to be consumed by the thought of fire, of energy, of will. It is strength coursing through me. Then to the west, water, which flows over and around me, emotion and feeling. And finally, north, the element of earth, my body filled with silence. I contain and encompass the entirety of the world. It is both part of me and held by me, very gently cupped in my hands. This wasn't a ritual I performed growing up as a witch. I don't know if Agnieszka ever performed this or any rituals at all, actually. What I recall of her magic was very matter-of-fact, practical, the spells of daily life. Then she and my mom split up when I was still young. My mother was a witch too, but non-practicing, and my magical education was largely neglected between Agnieszka's departure and when I began to explore the craft for myself. But that was much later. I owe Agnieszka a lot. In the first years I worked at the launch facility, the road to the campus was knotted with cars each and every morning. Actual gas-fueled cars that would squat all day unused in the vast parking lots encircling the facility's collection of buildings and warehouses and hangars. I rode my bike even then. It wasn't very pleasant, of course, dodging and weaving amongst angry cars, belching exhaust, their engines emitting a constant low-level whine. There aren't any cars now. Norma, who works with onboard power systems, the cute one with short dark hair and 1,000 twinkling piercings, was the last holdout at the facility, although she had long since switched to a refurbished electric car. Eventually, she gave even that up, the effort outweighing what it contributed to her image. There is no gas to be had these days, and rechargeable batteries are in short supply. Using them for something as frivolous as a single-user vehicle is absurd. Now, ribbons of bicycles thread across the wide road, sometimes intertwining, more often parallel, accompanied by a wave of happy chatter and random shouts. So much is wrong with our world that it is easy to overcompensate and find extreme joy in the mundane. When I was first hired to work on the maintenance team, it was large and divided into sub-teams, each assigned to not only different buildings, but specific floors or wings. Back then, every office was full, each lab in use, in building after building after building. There were talks of expansion. And then it began to fall away, bit by bit. Fewer contracts, fewer staff, buildings were emptied and boarded up. I've locked my bike in the same place on the same rack I always have. Today is no different, and I go inside, nodding to Marie at the security desk. My pass dangles around my neck, although she doesn't look at it. The long hall I walk down ends at the entrance to the maintenance staff change room. I leave my bag there, cover my hair, and put on a fresh mask, thin jumpsuit, and shoe covers. Going into the central maintenance area, I check my cleaning cart to make sure the supplies are in order. These days, it is only Clara and I in maintenance. I do the cleaning, and she takes care of repairs. Everyone, all the scientists and engineers, all the auxiliary staff are in this single building now, and even so, it isn't full. Not even close. I push the cart through the swinging doors and begin down the central hallway. Stopping in the first office, I open the door. No one is there, so I quickly collect the garbage and sweep the floor. One office, then another. I make my way along the hallway until I reach the clean room where our rover is being constructed right now. I am also responsible for ensuring the clean room's pristine state is maintained, but that comes last after everything else is done and I myself am re-sanitized and re-wrapped. Nevertheless, regardless, I never pass by without looking through the window and saying hello. Good morning, Coda, I call out. She doesn't have an official name yet, but everyone has decided that Coda is perfect, the culmination of the work of generations. While everything else around us continues to fall apart, Coda will be sent to Mars, the last rover. I'll stop there. So, does anybody have any questions? No?
You're just making me think about names and naming, the ways that with Coda, people just seem to sort of agree on that name because it's fitting. And that was so fascinating. Now I'm thinking about all the names of my characters.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that because a lot of that came out of that, the theme of this book was, the witchcraft, bikes in space, but witchcraft. And so yeah, so that was, I was, mine came out of was in my early 20s. I read a lot of Starhawk's books. I don't know if anybody is familiar with, late, 90s era Wiccan writing, but so that's that. But the idea of naming in that is so integral to a lot of the Wiccan thought in that. So that's actually where a lot of the ideas for this came from. So yeah.
I spend a lot of time thinking about character names. It's really fun. Sometimes I wonder if I spend more time thinking about character names than I did with my actual flesh and blood children, but
Sometimes they're easy and you just know what they are, and sometimes you sit there and you're like, okay, but what are you actually called, and does it sound right, and does it suit you?
Yeah.
And also, have I used this name before?
I've occasionally had issues where a name worked really well for a character, but then the book was translated and that name didn't work well. I have a book, obviously I wrote in English with a character whose name is Lord Maudit, but in French that means damned. And so when they did the French translation, we had to change his name to something else.
Yeah, that's funny. So I often sort of randomly name characters because I struggle with it, especially minor characters. And I recently as a novella I've been working on for quite a while, and so the minor characters had been kind of randomly named, and then I was sharing it with my critique group, and as I was rereading it before sharing it with them, I realized that one of my characters shared almost exactly the same name as a character in somebody else's piece that we had just, a very long novel that we had just finished reading, and their character was very central to the story and was not at all like the character with the same name in mine. And I changed it because I thought it was going to be very, very distracting for them as a group to read it. But also to me, it sort of suddenly felt like this was very wrong, like having just read this other piece with this person with the same name. And it was like, no, they are nothing alike. And, and it's like that way. I don't like using the names of people I know. Like, yeah, just generally, I find it very kind of off-putting for myself, kind of, but
Although I have to say I'm an academic, and when people annoy me, they become villains. Never my students. None of my students have become villains, but there are certain administrators who do show up as villains in some of my books, and it's very therapeutic.
I've done the nice thing in some of the academics that I like, or if I really like their books, with some slightly disguised names, but a couple of the professors in Spells and Sensibility, or a couple of book titles in some of the other stories that I have are like people that I know at medieval studies conferences and things, or this is really close to one of their book titles. Or in one of my non-speculative fiction series, I actually have a character who's a medieval professor, but he's working on a lot of the research that one of my dissertation committee works on. So it's like, and I'm going to name drop this book, which is very close to her book, and things like that.
I will say that I do sometimes, in looking for names, will just look at like the names of people in my Twitter feed. And, so sometimes they are people I kind of like tangentially know. They're not necessarily, so it does. And I do also, Scrivener has a name generator. And I do use that a fair bit to, or at least to get me started on what, yeah.
I use behind the name a lot because that's both given names and surnames, and it has them from a lot of different cultures, and that one I find really helpful. You can search by meaning, which can be really fun, and
yeah. I will say with the Scrivener one, you can add extra lists to it. So I have a bunch of different by different, area of origin in that, and then I'll kind of tweak what I'm searching, for, kind of thing, depending on what I'm trying to do. But,
I've done the fantasy name generator a couple times, and I don't usually end up using exactly what it comes up with, but sometimes it'll make me think about, oh, that's an interesting syllable, let me play with that a little bit. So sometimes it's good if my head is just stuck in a certain rut of all my fantasy names are starting to sound the same. Let me see what something else comes up with.
That
Yeah.
is an excellent troll name. That is the best troll name.
That is amazing. We only have a few minutes left. So why don't we share with the others here where they can find us? I think everybody here has been at other panels and stuff already this weekend, but that's okay. Kristen, do you want to start?
Sure. Around in lots of places. And actually, our history and medieval fantasy panel is this afternoon. So still come to see that, especially if you want to hear me talk about medieval history more. I am still on the place formerly known as Twitter for until it goes away as Kristen Noone. I'm on Blue Sky as KL Noone, so you can come find me over there. I'm also KL Noone on Mastodon. I'm Greenwood Outlaw on Instagram, which will get you a lot of pictures of our cat and some craft beer and pretty flowers and sometimes books. Where else am I? You can find all my books and things on Amazon, directly from JMS Books, the usual places, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, things like that. I think that's everything. Facebook is just Kristen Noone as well.
Oh, thank you. Kim?
I'm K Fielding Writes throughout the universe, so kfieldingwrites.com. I'm on Twitter. I started a TikTok account against my will, so on TikTok and Facebook and all of that, and Instagram. And I'm leaving in a couple of days for a trip to Croatia and Italy, so I will have travel pictures on Insta. So if you like travel pictures, that's the place to go.
Yeah, I think we all use our Instagram for various things, don't we? Yeah. So my Instagram is monique.alex, and it is mostly running pictures because I'm a distance runner. So that's my accountability thing are my daily run pictures there. I'm at Monique AC on Twitter and Mastodon, and on Blue Sky, maybe Monique AC or maybe Monique.alex. Anyway, I'm on Blue Sky too. I'm kind of hoping that takes off because I like the format of it. Yeah, and my website is notwhereilive.ca. And I shared those in the social media connections channel on our Discord. So thank you everybody for coming. I really enjoyed this. It was really lovely to read with you guys. There is currently a panel continuing on for the next 30 minutes on aging and speculative fiction, if you want to join that. Then we'll have a little bit of a break for lunch, and then this afternoon there is one more reading session, and then there will be that final panel that Kristen mentioned on fantasy and medieval history that I am really looking forward to. So thank you all for coming, and I'll see you around. Okay, bye-bye.